Personal growth can often be something that's really difficult to measure. It's hard to see within ourselves how we're growing because often it takes time for us to see the results. And it can be very discouraging if we don't see some growth right away. And there are many people that get involved in something. We see a lot of this around New Year's, where people make all these resolutions and they try to do these big things and then they end up giving them up. Now, habits can be difficult to form, but sometimes I think we can give up on ourselves because we're not seeing the growth that we expect. And it's unfortunate because every time we invest our effort into something, we are growing. We are gaining knowledge and we are expanding our abilities. It's just sometimes happening at a rate that is kind of indiscernible to us. Now, way back in the day, I think I was probably in middle school, I was really committed to becoming really good at art, specifically drawing comic strips. Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson, he was my inspiration. Also Gary Larson with the Far Side and some other comics that I really, really loved. I wanted to be like those guys. And so I would sit there and I was drawing, my own comics to try to come up with my own concept that could be original and maybe as funny as and engaging as what those guys were producing. But it was a struggle because I didn't have any kind of formal training. I was just figuring all of this out on my own. And I didn't really have access to a lot of resources. There wasn't any internet way back then. And so I couldn't just look up tutorials on how to do things. You actually had to buy books and read them. And there weren't very many cartooning books. A lot of these guys came from, an art background and had access to all of this teaching and instruction. And a lot of those guys, they kind of just made it up from scratch, I'm sure too. But I didn't know how to get to where I wanted to be. So I just figured, well, if I just draw enough, then I can improve my skills over the time because I'm investing in my abilities by just repetition and trying different things. And so that's basically what I did. But still, it just seemed like I wasn't getting any better. And one day I'm flipping through some of my art and I see a collection of old drawings. Well, old for me, 6 months old. They'd been sitting around for 6 months. And so I picked them up and I was flipping through and looking at them and I was comparing them to what I did presently. And I thought to myself, wow, I've actually gotten better. I didn't realize it, but I'm drawing these characters better. My lines are smoother. I have more control over the pen and how I'm putting down these lines. And that was very, very interesting to me. And so what I ended up doing was I said, you know what, every 6 months, I'm going to look back on my work and I'm going to see how far I've come. And so that's what I would do is I'd go forward and then 6 months I'd look back and I'd compare. And I'd do that again and again and again. I did that for several years. And it was thrilling to me to see my growth happening and having some way to measure it. Now, that's what I did with art and drawings, but any skills that we seek to develop, the same principles, they're all there because it's our effort going into something. And so if you figure out some kind of way of tracking your progress and tracking your goals, you'll be amazed at what you're able to do. I was just talking to somebody who I'm working with right now and teaching them how to do what I do. And they were talking to me about how they feel a little bit frustrated because of their growth. And I asked them, I said, hey, what were you doing 6 months ago? He goes, I was sitting around playing video games. And so I compared, I was like, well, look what you've done now. You've landed multiple extremely impressive website clients. You're doing all of these other things. You're involved in all these other projects. You're interviewing new prospective clients. You're landing deals. You're planning on building your own system. You're doing all these amazing things that were not even possible. They weren't even thinkable just 6 months ago, and look where you are right now. And so anyway, that conversation with him brought me back to my childhood, made me remember this kind of 6-month interval thing. Now, I think growth happens many times a lot more rapid than 6 months. I just think 6 months is kind of a really interesting time period to kind of look back, because you can make some really phenomenal changes in 6 months. You can make amazing changes in 20 days, believe it or not. It's quite phenomenal what we're capable of, in just trusting in your natural human ability to learn and grow and develop new skills and improve. But you got to find some way of tracking it and looking at it. And honestly, I'm a huge journaler. I have a stack of journals up there on my shelf right now. I've got 3 of them here to my left. I have multiple digital journals, and I've got even more back there in my room. And I'm always tracking things and tracking progress. I have business journals for all of the different projects I'm involved in. And so as I'm learning new things in business, I copy links, I take those little segments out, and I save those quotes and those lines and even lines of code and all this information. I'm saving it. I have client journals as well. From the very first moment that I talk to a client, there's a client journal in my notes program. And so I open that up, I put their name in there, and I take notes about what we talked about and what we discussed. And as I work on their project, those notes are constantly added to it. So I can see that. And so I have all this information out there showing progress and growth. I see it around me. I can literally see where I'm going, what I've done, and I have this big picture of things. And it helps with memory recall. It helps in so many different ways. But it's a really incredible thing to do if you want to have that encouragement and to avoid that discouragement that you can feel from this idea that you're not growing or you're not growing enough. It's important to be able to look back to where you started and to see where you are now and the progress that you've made. Because if you made this much progress between then and now, where are you going to be in 6 months from now? And that to me is such a thrilling thought. Is, man, if I came this far in this short amount of time, where am I going to be in a couple of months? And so even starting this podcast and all these other things I spin off and start up, I always look forward to the future. And I know that even the smallest little bit of effort I put into each one of these things is something. It doesn't matter how big, how small, I'm contributing to something that's only going to keep growing and growing into the future. And so I find a ton of encouragement in that. And so I'm hoping that if you're listening to this right now, if you're struggling with any of these things, find some way of tracking your progress, find some way of looking back. And maybe you've been involved in something for months and months and years. Take a look back right now. Where were you 6 months ago? Where were you a year from now? And maybe that growth hasn't been that much. And maybe even looking back, you're like, well, I've made it to this point, but it's not very far. It's not a significant enough leap of where I felt like I should be. Well, what has kept you from getting to where you want to be? I think each of us are going to have a different answer to some of those questions. And there could be a myriad of reasons why certain obstacles are in our path. There could be physical, mental, situational limitations. Some that are very hard or maybe even impossible to actually get around. And we really need to be realistic with ourselves about some of those things. But that's where it gets to be kind of a paradox, because sometimes you don't know what your potential is until you try. It's like a little kid, when they get something brand new, they start playing with it really hard, ramming it into the walls because they don't know how fragile it could be. Maybe it's tough enough to withstand all of the force they put onto it. But then boom, 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 they're slamming around, something breaks. And they're devastated. They cry. They're like, oh, my toy broke. Oh no. It's like, well, you were banging against the wall. And the kid sitting there thinking, Well, I had no idea that that would break it. Now you do. You're an adult. You've done this a million times. I just got this brand new toy. I didn't know what it's capable of. That's often what happens when we encounter something new. We got to kick the tires. We got to find out where the boundaries and the weaknesses are. We don't know where those limitations lie when it comes to something new. And that can be really challenging because sometimes we pull back a little bit because we think, oh, maybe the limitations are just right outside my reach. But those limitations could actually be miles and miles away. And imagine limiting yourself to just beyond your arm's reach when you have like miles of potential surrounding you. Now, I'm not one of those people that really believes that anybody can do anything. I think that the potential is there, and you should never try to place limitations in front of people or try to restrict their effort when they're trying to kind of find those limitations and wrestle with that thing, right? But at some point, you got to be realistic with yourself about what's actually possible. And I think that conversation should only happen after you have extended every possible effort. Because some people give up way, way, way too soon. They give in when they've only put in just a fraction of the time that it takes to actually make something happen. But some people, they've been told, hey, you can do anything you want. All you have to do is keep working at it. And so I'm just kind of thinking of American Idol, where you see people who've been singing for years and years and years, and they're clearly tone deaf, or just what they need to be at the level that they're trying to be at just is not there and probably never will be. They're missing those pieces either in terms of talent, or let's say a lot of them have worked really, really hard. Maybe they haven't had access to the right resources. Maybe with a good coach, they could do a lot better, but maybe they don't have financial access to something like that. That's not something you could ever get for themselves. Maybe there's another path they can take of working hard and saving money, getting access to a coach and whatnot. But look, not every single person in the world is going to be Michael Jordan, which is why people look up to Michael Jordan, because he is Michael Jordan. And there's a mix of effort, raw talent, so many different conditions that had to exist for Michael Jordan to be Michael Jordan. And that's not going to happen for every single person on the face of the earth. But there is a space, I think, for each individual person to grow and to thrive and to flourish to one degree or another. It's just finding it. And it may not be something very obvious. And I think some people end up staying too long in something they're not a good fit for, because they've narrowed their vision so down to one thing they want to achieve that they've excluded all other possibilities. And I don't think that's very healthy either. I think you got to keep your mind open to multiple possibilities and work hard at one thing. Like, yes, have something that you're going to strive for and to put all of your effort into, but you need to be very realistic about what is possible. You don't want to limit yourself. Like I said, it's a bit of a paradox, right? Because you don't really know until you try. And you may have everyone around you telling you you'll never make it. And then to their astonishment, you bust through all of those things and achieve it. And we love those stories. And we all hope that maybe that's us. And maybe it is. But like I said, it's a really hard thing. And I don't have all of the answers as to how you can possibly predict that, because so many people do it in the face of just insurmountable seeming odds. And so at the very least, the whole thing I want to kind of put out there is make sure that you're tracking your progress. Because the worst thing is to be making incredible progress and not realizing it, and then giving up when you've done so well. Like you're on course, you're doing better than you thought you were, but then just to give up. That's what I hate seeing. Now, if you're tracking your progress and you've put a couple years into it and you've invested all of the right things and your progress has just been like millimeters, like you're not growing, I think that's when you need to start reconsidering and looking at things. But really do not give up on something when you haven't been paying attention to your growth. Focus on that growth and you may be surprised at what you find. It can give you additional knowledge that you'll need one way or the other, depending if you need to pivot and change towards something else, or if you need to keep continuing down this track. Tracking your progress is gonna give you insight into that whole thing. It's incredibly valuable. That's all for today. So hey, get out there and create some greatness.